Imagine a small city surrounded by seven hills, destined to dominate the known world. How did it do it? Prepare yourself for an epic journey that begins with a modest citadel on the Tiber and ends with the birth of an empire that shaped Western civilization. Today we will discover the secrets, strategies, and bloody battles that transformed Rome from a mere city-state into the undisputed power of the Mediterranean. We will see how every victory, every defeat, and every internal crisis only tempered her destiny, leading her to become the legend we still study today. Think of Rome not as a project born already large, but as a tiny seed planted in fertile soil, which year after year, century after century grew until it became a thousand-year-old oak tree. This transformation from a small city-state to the undisputed master of the Mediterranean was no accident, but the result of a historical process spanning nearly 700 years. 7 centuries of conquest, incredible military and diplomatic strategies, and a constant capacity for adaptation that redefined the very concept of power. It is a tale of ambition, resilience, and at times brutality, one that can be broken down into pivotal phases, each of which left an indelible mark on Rome's inexorable march to greatness. The first real stop on this expansive journey was not overseas but right at home on the Italian peninsula. Rome initially was just one of many Latin cities, often in conflict with its neighbors, but its hunger for expansion was insatiable. The beginning of Roman hegemony materialized with the subjugation of the surrounding Italic populations, a patchwork of different cultures and tribes ranging from the Latins to the Etruscans, from the Umbrians to the Samnites. But among all these, it was the series of conflicts against the Samnites that represented the true test for the nascent Roman power. Between the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, the Roman Republic engaged in three long and brutal wars against the Samnites, a mountain people who inhabited the central southern Apennines. These were not skirmishes but true clashes between giants. The Samnites were fierce warriors, accustomed to living in a harsh environment, and they put up a strenuous resistance, putting the Roman legions to the test. One example is the disastrous Battle of the Caudine Forks, where an entire Roman army was humiliated and forced to pass under the yoke. But Rome had a unique characteristic, the ability to learn from defeat. It was precisely in these wars that Rome developed and perfected new military tactics. The army, which previously fought as a rigid phalanx, was transformed. The Manipulator Legion was born, a more flexible formation, capable of adapting to mountainous terrain and better responding to enemy attacks. Each maniple was like an autonomous unit, capable of moving and fighting independently. This allowed Rome to turn its defeats into valuable lessons, strengthening the organization, discipline, and equipment of its soldiers. The final victory over the Samnites, achieved with incredible tenacity, consolidated Roman control over much of the peninsula and gave Rome undisputed authority over its neighbors. It was no longer just a city, but the dominant power in central Italy. But the real test by fire, the one that demonstrated to the entire Hellenistic world that a new player had emerged on the scene, came with Pyrrhus. This king of Epirus, a region of ancient Greece, was considered one of the greatest generals of his time, a true heir to Alexander the Great. In 280 BC, he intervened in Italy at the request of the Greek city of Tarentum, which felt threatened by the Roman advance. Pyrrhus landed with a massive army, which included war elephants, exotic and terrifying creatures for the Romans. Initially, it achieved spectacular victories, such as those of Heraclea and Ascoli Satriano. The Romans, accustomed to fighting with other infantry, found themselves faced with tactics and armament they were unfamiliar with. However, these victories, while brilliant, were Pyrrhic. They cost Pyrrhus a very high price in terms of men and resources, a price his small kingdom could not afford. After one victory, Pyrrhus is said to have exclaimed, "Another victory like this and I'll be ruined." Rome, on the other hand, despite suffering significant losses, demonstrated extraordinary resilience. It could draw on a much larger pool of men and had a resilience that amazed Pyrrhus himself. Despite initial defeats, the Romans did not give up. Finally, at the Battle of Benevento in 275 BC, Rome managed to defeat Pyrrhus, forcing him to retreat to Greece. This victory was not just a military triumph, it was a statement to the world. Rome had demonstrated its ability to resist and defeat even a world famous general, proving its growing military and political power. Italy was now firmly in Rome's hands. With Italy under its control, Rome opened up to the Mediterranean and found itself face to face with the only other superpower of the time, Carthage. This powerful North African city state, located in present day Tunisia, was a queen of the seas, with an immense navy and a trading empire that stretched from Spain to Sicily. Their rivalry was inevitable, a classic clash between Roman land power and Carthaginian thalassocracy. The conflict, known as the Punic Wars, from the Latin term Punicus, meaning Carthaginians, lasted over a century, from 264 to 146 BC, and was one of the most epic and decisive clashes in ancient history. The spark that lit the fuse was Sicily, a strategically crucial island. Rome initially was completely inexperienced in naval matters. Its legions were unbeatable on land, but they lacked a navy worthy of the name. Carthage, on the other hand, had dominated the seas for centuries. This seemed an insurmountable disadvantage. But Rome once again demonstrated its extraordinary capacity for adaptation. In a feat of incredible engineering and willpower, the Romans copied and improved upon Carthaginian ships, building a fleet from scratch in record time. And not only that, they invented the corvus, a gangway equipped with a harpoon, which allowed legionaries to transform naval battles into land engagements. This ingenious innovation neutralized the Carthaginian advantage. After years of fierce naval battles, Rome defeated Carthage and gained control of Sicily, which became its first overseas province. It was a resounding and unexpected success which opened the doors to maritime dominance for Rome. But the true legend of this clash came with the Second Punic War, dominated by the figure of Hannibal Barca, one of the greatest military strategists of all time. Hannibal, son of the Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca, harbored a deep and sworn hatred for Rome. In 218 BC, in a daring and unprecedented move, he crossed the Pyrenees and the Alps with an army of tens of thousands of soldiers, horses, and even elephants. It was a logistical and military feat that still leaves us speechless today. He invaded Italy and for nearly 15 years sowed terror across the peninsula. Hannibal inflicted on Rome some of the most devastating defeats in its history, such as those at Ticino, the Trebbia, Lake Trasimene, and above all, the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. At Cannae, Hannibal annihilated a Roman army twice his size, using a pincer maneuver that is still studied today in military academies. It is estimated that 50,000 70,000 Roman soldiers died in a single day. It was a devastating blow, one that would have crushed any other nation. But the Roman Republic resisted. Though cities surrendered and allies trembled, Rome did not capitulate. It mobilized all its resources, old and young, slaves and citizens, rebuilding armies over and over again. The strategy of General Fabius Maximus, nicknamed the Delayer, avoided direct confrontation, wearing Hannibal down in a war of attrition. Ultimately, it was Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus who turned the tide of the conflict, taking the war directly to Africa and forcing Hannibal to return home to defend Carthage. Hannibal's final defeat came at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. The Roman victory was total. Carthage was forced to pay a huge indemnity, give up all its colonies, and hand over its fleet. Many years later, to finally eliminate any threat, Rome attacked again in the Third Punic War, which culminated in the total destruction of Carthage in 146 BC. Its lands were sown with salt, a symbol of the end of an era. With Carthage eliminated, Rome became the undisputed dominant power in the Western Mediterranean, paving the way for the conquest of the Hellenistic world and then all of Europe. Paradoxically, the very military success that had made Rome master of the world brought with it the seeds of its internal destruction. The influx of immense wealth from the conquered provinces, along with thousands of slaves, upended Roman society. The peasants, the backbone of the army and the republic, were forced to abandon their fields, unable to compete with the large landed estates managed by slaves. Many of them ended up in Rome, swelling the ranks of an impoverished and unemployed urban plebs. This created a chasm between a new, extremely wealthy elite and an increasingly poorer mass. Corruption was rampant, and the republican institutions designed for a small city state were no longer capable of managing an empire. Social inequalities and internal tensions grew enormously, leading to a period of profound instability. In this climate of growing discontent, two extraordinary figures emerged: the brothers Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, tribunes of the plebs. They were nobles, but they chose to side with the poor. In 133 BC, Tiberius proposed an agrarian law aimed at redistributing public lands to the poorest citizens, rebuilding the peasantry and the army base. It was a bold attempt to save the republic from its own contradictions. But the conservative aristocracy fiercely opposed it. The Gracchi's proposal involved enormous economic interests. Tiberius was assassinated, a shocking event that broke a taboo. Never before had a tribune of the plebs been killed for political reasons. Years later, his brother Gaius took up his ideas, proposing even more far reaching reforms, including the creation of colonies for the poor and the protection of citizens' rights. Unfortunately, he too met the same fate. He was killed in a political conflict in 121 BC. The murders of the Gracchi marked the beginning of an era of political violence and bloodshed in the streets of Rome, a harbinger of the end of the Republic. With violence as an accepted political tool, the Republic slid into a succession of civil wars. The army, once loyal to Rome, was now increasingly loyal to its generals. The civil war between Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla in the 1st century BC was the most striking example. Marius gets a new man who had reformed the army, making it professional and loyal to the commander who paid him, and Sulla, a conservative aristocrat, clashed fiercely for control of Rome. Their struggles led to proscriptions, massacres of opponents, and the brutal use of the army for political purposes. Sulla, after defeating Marius, proclaimed himself dictator for an indefinite period, further weakening the republican institutions and paving the way for future strongmen. The stage was now set for the figure who would mark the point of no return, Gaius Julius Caesar. A charismatic general, ambitious politician, and brilliant writer, Caesar emerged as the most powerful figure of his generation. He conquered Gaul in a series of legendary military campaigns, enriching Rome and solidifying its reputation and the loyalty of its soldiers. His rise was unstoppable. When the Senate, fearing his growing power, tried to stop him, Caesar uttered the famous phrase, Alea iacta est, the die is cast, and crossed the Rubicon with his legions, sparking another civil war. He defeated his rivals, including Pompey the Great, and proclaimed himself dictator for life. Although Caesar had profound reform ideas and brought stability, his absolute power was seen by many as the end of republican freedom. Senators conspired against him and assassinated him on the Ides of March in 44 BC. Caesar's death, far from restoring the Republic, plunged Rome into another series of civil wars. It was Caesar's nephew and adopted son Octavian Caesar Wars who emerged victorious from these conflicts. With political and military skill, he defeated his opponents, including Mark Antony and Cleopatra. In 27 BC, Octavian consolidated his power, assuming the title of Augustus and becoming the first Roman emperor. The Republic had died not with a bang but with a long groan of unrest and civil war, ushering in the glorious but autocratic era of the Roman Empire. Rome's expansion is a story of incredible determination. From a small city, through the bloody Samnite Wars and the victory over Pyrrhus, Rome unified Italy. It then challenged and destroyed Carthage, its greatest rival in the Punic Wars, becoming the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. But this unstoppable rise led to devastating internal tensions, with the failed attempts of the Gracchi and the bloody civil wars of Marius and Sulla, which ultimately paved the way for Julius Caesar's ambition and the definitive fall of the Republic. This long and complex journey of conquest and transformation shows us how Rome's greatness was inextricably linked to both its military strength and its capacity for adaptation, but also to the intrinsic fragilities that led to its most radical transformation.